The story begins at a military airbase, where an AH-64 Apache helicopter, one of the most powerful and advanced attack helicopters in the world, is sitting quietly in the hangar. From the outside, it looks perfect. Its sleek frame, armored cockpit, and powerful rotor blades give it an intimidating presence. But inside, the helicopter is in serious trouble. Its engine, the heart of the machine, has completely failed. This isn't a small glitch or a minor malfunction. The engine has stopped working entirely, and nobody can figure out why. The Apache, which usually roars across the sky with unmatched speed and agility, is now nothing more than a massive, silent hunk of metal. The base quickly realizes the urgency of the situation. This isn't just about a single helicopter. The AH-64 Apache is a key part of the military's operations. Missions that rely on its speed, firepower, and precision are now at risk. If this helicopter remains grounded, it could affect training exercises, mission readiness, and even national security. The pressure on the maintenance team is enormous. Every officer and engineer knows that this helicopter cannot stay broken for long. They have to fix it, and they have to fix it fast. A team of the most skilled engineers is assembled. These are people who have spent years studying, repairing, and operating complex aircraft engines. Some have worked on Apaches for decades. They've seen engines fail before, and they've solved problems that seemed impossible at first glance. Yet as they begin inspecting this engine, frustration quickly sets in. They open panels, check wiring, test fuel lines, and examine the intricate components, but nothing seems to work. Every solution they try either fails completely or leads to new problems. As the hours pass, tension builds. The engineers start to feel the weight of the situation. They exchange worried glances and mutter to each other. Normally confident and composed, even the most experienced mechanics are starting to doubt themselves. They've never encountered a failure like this. Something about this engine is unusual, something no manual, no training, and no past experience has prepared them for. The atmosphere in the hangar becomes almost suffocating. The once busy and energetic space is now filled with the sounds of anxious whispers, the occasional click of tools, and the steady hum of machinery. Each failed attempt to repair the engine increases the sense of urgency. The longer the helicopter remains grounded, the greater the risk to upcoming missions. The engineers know that the military depends on them, and failure is not an option. Yet, despite their best efforts, the engine remains stubbornly dead. Outside the hangar, other personnel start noticing the unusual quiet of the Apache. Pilots who were scheduled to fly it begin pacing nervously. Officers who normally walk confidently through the base are now exchanging worried words about delays and potential consequences. Even the higher command, who usually handle strategic decisions far from the hangars, is aware of the problem. Rumors start spreading, and everyone begins to sense that this is not an ordinary engine failure. The engineers are not only battling the technical problem but also the psychological pressure. Each failed attempt chips away at their confidence. Normally, they would work calmly and systematically, knowing that persistence and skill will eventually solve any problem. But this time, nothing seems to work. They consult schematics, reference maintenance manuals, and even brainstorm unconventional solutions, but every attempt hits a dead end. It becomes clear that this is not a standard malfunction. It is something far more complex, something that might require thinking completely outside the box. Despite the growing frustration, there is also a sense of determination. The engineers are not willing to give up. They know the importance of the Apache and the responsibility resting on their shoulders. Each one silently vows to find a solution, even if it takes all night or longer. The hum of tension is matched by the quiet determination in the room. Everyone senses that this failure is extraordinary, and extraordinary challenges often require extraordinary solutions. As the day turns into evening, the hangar lights cast long shadows across the helicopter's metal frame. The Apache, once a symbol of power and precision, now sits immobile, a puzzle that refuses to be solved. Outside, the sun sets, but inside the hangar, the engineers are still working tirelessly. They know that the clock is ticking, and every hour that passes without a solution is a risk to the mission. Yet even in the midst of frustration, hope lingers. Somewhere, somehow, there must be a way to bring this helicopter back to life. And although nobody knows it yet, help is on the way. Someone with the knowledge, skill, and intuition to solve a problem that has defeated even the best experts. In this first part, the story sets the stage for an epic challenge. It shows the stakes, the tension, and the mysterious complexity of the engine failure. It establishes the engineers as skilled yet human, capable yet vulnerable, and it teases the arrival of a solution that will come from an unexpected source. The reader is left on edge, wondering how this impossible problem will ever be solved, and eager to see what happens next. As the hours turned into days, the situation with the AH-64 Apache helicopter grew more serious. The engine, the lifeblood of this advanced attack aircraft, continued to resist every attempt at repair. The initial hope that a quick fix could get it back in the air had vanished, replaced by growing frustration and a sense of urgency. The team of engineers, once confident in their skills, now felt the heavy weight of failure pressing down on them. They had faced tough challenges before, but this engine was different. It was as if it had a mind of its own, hiding its problems in ways that no training or experience could uncover. Every day, the engineers approached the Apache with a mix of determination and anxiety. They tried every conventional method they knew. They dismantled parts of the engine, examined intricate components, and ran countless tests. They replaced valves, recalibrated sensors, and even checked fuel systems multiple times. They followed manuals, schematics, and historical records of the helicopter's maintenance. Each step was precise and careful, executed by the hands of experts who had spent years working on machines like this. Yet each attempt ended in the same way, failure. As the failed attempts piled up, the mood in the hangar grew tense. The engineers began to question themselves, their skills, and even the reliability of the tools and manuals they had always trusted. Normally confident, they now whispered among themselves, wondering aloud if they had missed something obvious. Arguments occasionally broke out over the best course of action, but they were quickly silenced by the growing pressure to succeed. The longer the helicopter remained grounded, the more urgent the situation became. Every hour that passed without a solution meant delays in training exercises, postponed missions, and increased stress on everyone involved. Rumors began to circulate throughout the base. Pilots who were supposed to fly the Apache started speculating about the problem. Officers passing through the hangar exchanged worried glances and spoke in hushed tones about the unusual nature of this engine failure. It was unlike anything they had seen before. Some whispered that perhaps the helicopter was cursed, or that the fault was so rare that it had never been documented. Though most tried to hide their concern, the tension was palpable. Everyone could feel that this was not a typical technical problem. This was a challenge that seemed to defy logic. The engineers themselves began to notice patterns in their failures. Certain repairs seemed to work temporarily, only for the engine to fail again once it was tested under stress. Some components appeared fine at first glance but revealed hidden weaknesses under closer examination. Every discovery seemed to raise more questions than answers. The team consulted with each other constantly, trying to piece together clues, but the engine remained stubbornly uncooperative. The sense of being outmatched by a machine designed to be mastered was both humbling and frustrating. Despite the mounting pressure, the team refused to give up. They worked long hours, often late into the night, driven by duty, pride, and the knowledge that failure was not an option. Sleep-deprived but determined, they rotated shifts, keeping the work continuous. Engineers took meticulous notes, documented every test, and carefully monitored the engine's reactions to each intervention. The Apache, once a symbol of power and control, had become a puzzle, challenging the best minds in the room to think harder and dig deeper than ever before. The base command grew increasingly concerned. The grounded helicopter was not just a mechanical issue. It was now a critical operational problem. High-ranking officials started asking questions. When would it be fixed? Could it delay missions or compromise readiness? The engineers explained their efforts in detail, outlining everything they had tried, but the repeated failures only added to the worry. Everyone began to realize that this was not a typical engine failure. This was something unique, complex, and potentially unprecedented. Amid the growing frustration, small victories offered brief moments of hope. Occasionally, the engine would start for a few seconds or a test would show a minor improvement. These fleeting successes kept the engineers motivated, but they also reminded everyone how fragile the solution was. The problem was deep, hidden in the details of the engine's construction and its history. It was clear that conventional approaches were not enough. The team needed a breakthrough, a fresh perspective, or perhaps a person with a different kind of expertise to solve this puzzle. The story at this stage highlights the human side of technical challenges. It shows how even highly skilled professionals can feel defeated when faced with something they cannot immediately understand. The engineer's struggle is not just with metal and mechanics. It is also with frustration, self-doubt, and the mounting pressure from everyone relying on them. Their repeated failures build suspense and tension, making the eventual solution, when it comes, all the more satisfying. By the end of this part, the Apache remains grounded, the engineers exhausted but still determined, and the problem unsolved. The reader is left with a sense of anticipation, understanding the stakes, and realizing that the next move must come from someone capable of seeing what others cannot. A figure who will bring fresh insight and expertise to solve a seemingly impossible challenge. As the days dragged on and the AH-64 Apache remained grounded, the frustration among the engineers grew heavier. They had tried everything they knew, consulted every manual, and examined every component of the helicopter multiple times. Yet the engine refused to cooperate. The situation was becoming more than just a technical problem. It was beginning to feel personal. The engineers were not used to being beaten by a machine, and the longer the Apache stayed grounded, the more intense the pressure became. Rumors and anxious whispers filled the air around the hangar, and even the pilots who were waiting to fly the helicopter could feel the tension. It was at this point that the senior commander arrived. Unlike others, he did not rush in with panic or impatience. He walked calmly through the hangar, observing the scene with a sharp eye. His presence immediately drew attention. Engineers straightened up, and the air seemed to shift as the authority figure approached. He looked at the grounded Apache and then at the exhausted team of experts, studying their expressions, their gestures, and the tools scattered around. He did not speak at first. He simply observed, taking in the full picture. The engineers, some of whom were used to high-pressure situations, felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief because a commander was now aware of the problem firsthand, and anxiety because they feared judgment or criticism for their repeated failures. They began to explain what had been attempted so far. Each engineer outlined their efforts in detail, replaced components, recalibrated systems, tested fuel lines, followed manuals, and even tried unconventional methods. But each explanation ended with the same grim conclusion: the engine still would not work. The commander listened carefully, asking precise questions but without interrupting or expressing frustration. He wasn't just gathering information. He was analyzing the situation in a way that no one else had. Unlike the engineers, who were focused on fixing specific components, the commander looked at the helicopter as a whole system. He noticed subtle details that had gone unnoticed by the team. Slight wear on certain parts, unusual modifications from previous repairs, and patterns in how the engine had failed during testing. His approach was methodical but intuitive, combining experience with a deep understanding of complex machinery. As he walked around the helicopter, he noticed small clues that seemed meaningless to others but were significant to him. A worn connector here, a slightly bent fuel line there, and a faint mark on one of the internal components. All of these details started forming a picture in his mind. It was clear that the helicopter's engine had a history that was more complicated than anyone realized. The previous attempts by the engineers, although skillful, had failed to account for these hidden issues. After observing for some time, the commander called the team together. His voice was calm but carried authority. He told them that the problem was not just mechanical. It was unique and required knowledge that went beyond standard procedures. The engineers listened carefully, sensing that he had something different in mind. He spoke of a solution that they had never considered, something referred to only by a code name, the Widow. The mention of this name caught everyone off guard. Some engineers whispered to each other, unsure of what it meant. The term sounded mysterious, almost legendary, and it sparked curiosity as well as skepticism. The commander explained that the widow was not just a procedure or a part. It referred to a specialist with unmatched expertise in solving problems that others could not. This person had a reputation for fixing the most complex aircraft issues, often under circumstances where every conventional method had failed. The engineers were both intrigued and doubtful. Could one person really succeed where so many experts had failed? The commander's calm confidence suggested that he believed it could, and that was enough to convince the team to follow his orders. He gave the direct instruction. The widow must be contacted immediately. There was no hesitation, no debate, just a clear, decisive order. For the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope in the hangar. The engineers, who had been trapped in a cycle of failure and frustration, now felt a spark of anticipation. Perhaps the solution was not about doing more of the same, but about bringing in someone who could see the problem differently. The story in this part highlights more than just the technical aspects of repairing a helicopter engine. It shows the importance of leadership, observation, and perspective. The commander's approach is a contrast to the engineers' repeated attempts. While they were focused on individual parts and immediate fixes, the commander looked at the big picture, noticing patterns and details that others missed. He recognized that sometimes, solving an impossible problem requires not just skill, but wisdom, experience, and intuition. As the day ended, preparations began to contact the widow. The engineers continued to monitor the helicopter, but their frustration was replaced by cautious optimism. The commander's decision introduced a new dynamic, one that promised a breakthrough and hinted at a resolution that the team had thought impossible. The stage was set for someone with extraordinary expertise to enter the story and change the course of events. By the end of this part, the tension remains high, but there is a renewed sense of hope. The grounded Apache is still a mystery, but the introduction of the commander's perspective and the concept of the widow creates anticipation. The reader now understands that the solution will not come from conventional means, and that the upcoming events will involve ingenuity, experience, and perhaps a touch of legend. The story prepares the audience to meet the key figure who will tackle the impossible task and bring the helicopter back to life. After the commander made the decision to call the widow, the hangar was filled with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and cautious excitement. The engineers had spent days trying to fix the AH-64 Apache engine and had failed repeatedly. They were exhausted, frustrated, and questioning whether the helicopter could ever fly again. But the commander's words changed the atmosphere. There was now a glimmer of hope, even though no one fully understood who the widow was or what she could do. The team gathered around as the commander explained that the widow was a specialist unlike anyone they had ever met. She had a reputation for fixing machines that seemed impossible to repair. Her work was often described as unconventional, precise, and almost magical in its effectiveness. Some engineers exchanged skeptical glances. They were highly trained professionals, and the idea that one person could succeed where so many had failed sounded almost too good to be true. Yet the commander's calm confidence made it clear that there was no alternative. The helicopter had to fly again, and the widow was the only option. Orders were sent out immediately to contact her. Within hours, arrangements were made for her arrival. She was known for working quickly but methodically, never rushing yet never wasting a moment. The engineers tried to prepare for her arrival, cleaning up the workspace and gathering tools and manuals. They reviewed everything they had done over the past days, hoping that having the full picture would help her understand the engine's issues. Still, no one could predict what approach she would take or what secrets she might uncover. When she finally arrived, the atmosphere in the hangar shifted. The widow walked in quietly but with an air of authority that commanded attention without a word. She was calm, collected, and observant, immediately scanning the Apache engine and the scattered tools and notes. Unlike the engineers, who were tense and anxious, she seemed unbothered by the previous failures. Her presence suggested that she had seen similar problems many times before, and that she understood exactly what needed to be done. The engineers watched closely as she began her assessment. She didn't rush to dismantle parts or start testing immediately. Instead, she carefully examined the engine from top to bottom, taking note of every detail. Her eyes moved over components that the engineers had handled multiple times, noticing subtle marks, unusual wear, and traces of modifications that had gone unnoticed. It became clear that her approach was different. While the engineers had focused on individual parts and standard procedures, she was looking at the engine as a complete system, searching for hidden connections and unusual patterns that might explain why nothing else had worked. As she worked, the widow asked questions about the engine's history, past repairs, modifications, and previous problems. The engineers provided answers, some reluctantly at first, because they feared their earlier failures might be seen as incompetence. However, the widow treated their information as valuable data rather than mistakes. Her ability to combine historical context with careful observation gave her insight that no manual or schematic could provide. She began forming a theory about the engine's failure, connecting seemingly unrelated clues in ways the team had never considered. The engineers felt a mix of relief and awe. They were used to being the problem solvers, the experts in the hangar. Now, they were watching someone else take the lead with a level of confidence and skill that was both intimidating and inspiring. Every action the widow took seemed deliberate and precise, as if she had rehearsed it in her mind countless times before touching a single component. She did not rely solely on tools or standard procedures. Instead, she combined intuition, experience, and deep technical knowledge. Hours passed as she worked, examining and testing the engine carefully. The team observed in silence, interrupted only by occasional questions she asked to clarify details. It was clear that this was not a quick fix. The widow was methodical, leaving no stone unturned and no detail overlooked. Unlike previous attempts, which often ended in frustration, every step she took seemed to build toward a solution, revealing clues about the engine's hidden issues. The story in this part highlights the power of expertise, perspective, and leadership. It shows how sometimes solving a problem requires more than just skill. It requires patience, observation, and the ability to see connections that others miss. The widow represented a combination of all these qualities, bringing a new approach that was unlike anything the engineers had tried. Her presence transformed the hangar from a place of frustration and failure into a space filled with anticipation and hope. By the end of this part, the stage is set for a breakthrough. The engineers, who had been trapped in a cycle of repeated failure, are now ready to learn from the widow. The Apache engine, once an insurmountable challenge, is about to be examined in a way no one else has dared. The story creates suspense and excitement, leaving the reader eager to discover how the widow will solve the problem and bring the legendary helicopter back to life. The combination of mystery, expertise, and high stakes ensures that the narrative remains gripping, highlighting the extraordinary skill required to overcome what everyone else thought was impossible. When the widow finally turned her full attention to the AH-64 Apache engine, the hangar fell silent. For days, the engineers had tried everything, but now they were watching someone approach the problem in a completely different way. The widow didn't rush. She didn't fumble with tools or run tests immediately. Instead, she studied the helicopter with a quiet focus that made it clear she was thinking several steps ahead. Her eyes moved carefully over the engine's complex network of parts, inspecting areas that had been touched countless times by the engineers but were never properly understood. The engineers watched in awe as she moved with purpose and precision. Unlike their previous attempts, which often involved trial and error, the widow's approach was deliberate. She began by looking at the engine's overall structure rather than focusing solely on individual components. She traced connections, studied the modifications from previous repairs, and compared what she saw with what should have been there according to the schematics. Every observation she made seemed to carry weight, as though she could see the history of the engine written in its metal, wiring, and machinery. Hours passed as she examined the Apache. The team noticed something unusual. She asked very few questions, but when she did, they were precise, almost surgical. Each question revealed a deep understanding of aircraft engines and an ability to focus on details that others overlooked. While the engineers had been looking at parts and following manuals, She was looking for patterns, hidden flaws, and subtle signs that indicated why the engine kept failing. Even small anomalies, like a faint scratch on a rotor or an almost invisible misalignment, caught her attention. It was as if her experience allowed her to read the machine in ways others could not. After careful observation, the widow began running specific tests. She didn't use the standard testing procedures the engineers were accustomed to. Instead, she applied her own methods, adjusting controls and measuring responses in a sequence designed to reveal hidden issues. These tests were unusual and precise, showing a level of technical expertise that went far beyond what the manual suggested. The engineers, who had been the experts in the hangar until now, watched silently, learning without realizing it. Each test seemed to uncover new information about the engine's hidden problems. It didn't take long for her to begin piecing the puzzle together. She noticed that one of the critical components had a subtle flaw introduced during a past repair. It wasn't a part that was commonly known to fail, and it was not something that could be seen without careful inspection and deep understanding. This flaw caused a chain reaction, affecting other parts of the engine and making every conventional repair attempt useless. The engineers had been trying to fix symptoms without realizing the root cause. The widow's ability to see the problem at a systemic level was what set her apart. Once she identified the flaw, she started planning the repair. Her method was unlike anything the engineers had tried. It required extreme precision, patience, and an understanding of how each adjustment would affect the engine's overall performance. She explained a few steps to the team, but mostly, she worked quietly, demonstrating rather than instructing. The engineers realized that they were witnessing a master at work, someone whose skill and intuition allowed her to solve problems that no one else could. The atmosphere in the hangar shifted. Where frustration and doubt had ruled, now there was a sense of hope and anticipation. The engineers, once exhausted and demoralized, were inspired by the widow's confidence and skill. They began to understand that solving this problem required more than brute force or following instructions. It required insight, experience, and the ability to think differently. The widow's approach was methodical, almost surgical, and it became clear that the solution was not just about replacing parts but about understanding how the engine functioned as a whole. As she worked, small successes began to appear. Parts that had previously caused repeated failures were adjusted carefully, and the engine started responding in ways it hadn't before. Every improvement was subtle but meaningful. The engineers were amazed at how one person could identify problems and solutions that had eluded a team of experts for days. They started paying closer attention, taking notes, and learning from her approach. It was a lesson not just in engineering but in patience, observation, and thinking outside conventional methods. By the end of the day, the widow had made significant progress. The root cause of the engine failure had been identified, and the first steps toward a permanent repair were complete. The Apache, which had been grounded and silent for days, now showed signs of life. The team felt a mixture of relief, awe, and renewed motivation. They realized that expertise combined with patience, observation, and creativity could achieve what repeated conventional efforts could not. This part of the story emphasizes the power of skill, experience, and unconventional thinking. It shows how solving a problem is not always about brute force or following manuals. It's about understanding, insight, and knowing where to look. The widow's approach transformed the impossible challenge into a solvable one, inspiring the engineers and preparing the stage for the engine to be fully repaired. The reader is left in suspense and excitement, anticipating the moment when the Apache will finally roar back to life under the guidance of this extraordinary specialist. After hours of careful examination and meticulous testing, the widow finally began to implement her repair plan on the AH-64 Apache engine. The engineers watched closely, almost holding their breath. For days, they had been stuck in a frustrating cycle of failed attempts. But now, under the widow's guidance, the process felt different. Focused, deliberate, and confident. Unlike their previous efforts, this approach wasn't random or rushed. Every move was calculated, every adjustment precise. She started by addressing the root problem she had discovered during her inspection. A critical component previously overlooked by everyone had been causing a chain reaction of malfunctions across the engine. It was a flaw so subtle that standard procedures could never have revealed it. The engineers had been trying to fix the symptoms rather than the cause, but the widow's insight allowed her to focus on the heart of the problem. Her hands moved expertly, adjusting, aligning, and recalibrating components with a confidence that only years of experience could provide. What made her work so remarkable was her ability to predict how the engine would respond to each adjustment. The engineers were amazed as they watched her test small changes and then carefully observe the results. With every successful adjustment, the engine responded in a way it hadn't in days. The reaction was subtle at first, a slight hum, a tiny vibration, but it was enough to show that her strategy was working. Slowly, the impossible problem was starting to unravel piece by piece. The engineers couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and humility. They had been experts in this field for years, yet the widow was solving a problem that had defeated them all. Her approach was not just about technical skill. It was about understanding the engine as a complete system, seeing connections that others had missed, and combining knowledge with intuition. She moved with purpose, yet her calm demeanor kept the atmosphere in the hangar focused and disciplined. There was no panic, no rushed attempts, only precise, intelligent work. As she continued, the widow introduced techniques that the engineers had never seen before. Some were unconventional, almost experimental, yet each one was carefully calculated. She adjusted parts in ways that seemed counterintuitive, tested reactions under controlled conditions, and constantly monitored how the system responded. The engineers realized that they were witnessing more than just a repair. They were watching a masterclass in problem-solving. Every action seemed to build on the last, bringing the engine closer to functionality with every step. Hours passed, and the tension in the hangar grew, but in a different way now. It was no longer frustration or doubt that filled the air. It was anticipation and focus. The engineers leaned closer, sometimes offering tools or assistance when asked, but mostly observing. They could see the engine responding in ways that were impossible before. Small signs of life, like a subtle vibration or a slight glow from internal components, indicated that the widow's approach was working. Slowly but surely, the engine began to show signs of recovery. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the engine roared to life. The sound was powerful and steady, unlike anything the engineers had heard in the past few days. The AH-64 Apache, once a silent, grounded machine, was now alive again, responding with full power and precision. The relief in the hangar was palpable. Engineers who had been exhausted, frustrated, and doubtful now erupted in cheers and applause. They had witnessed a problem that seemed impossible to solve finally being overcome by one extraordinary individual. The impact of this breakthrough went beyond the technical achievement. It was a lesson in patience, perspective, and expertise. The engineers realized that sometimes, problems cannot be solved by following the usual steps or relying solely on manuals. They need insight, creativity, and the ability to see beyond the obvious. The widow had shown them that skill and intuition could achieve what experience alone could not, and her success inspired them to approach future challenges with a new mindset. The commander, who had made the call to bring in the widow, watched the entire process with quiet satisfaction. His decision, initially met with skepticism, had proven brilliant. By trusting the judgment of someone with unconventional expertise, he had turned a desperate situation into a success story. The engineers, who had been trapped in repeated failure, now had renewed confidence and a deeper respect for the value of experience and unconventional thinking. As the engine continued to run smoothly, tests were conducted to ensure it could handle the demands of flight. Every system responded perfectly, every part functioning as it should. The Apache was ready to return to service, stronger and more reliable than before. What had once seemed like an insurmountable problem had been solved, not by luck or trial and error, but through precise skill, careful observation, and deep understanding. This part of the story emphasizes the dramatic moment of triumph, showing how expertise, patience, and unconventional thinking can overcome even the most challenging obstacles. The engineers learned a powerful lesson. The commander's trust was validated, and the Apache helicopter was brought back to life, ready for action. The tension and suspense of the previous parts reached their peak. delivering a satisfying resolution to the technical challenge, while also highlighting human ingenuity and the power of skill and experience in solving extraordinary problems. After the AH-64 Apache engine roared back to life, the hangar erupted in a mixture of relief, awe, and celebration. For days, the engineers had been trapped in a frustrating cycle of failed repairs. Watching a helicopter they depended on remain silent and immobile. Now, the impossible had been achieved, and it was clear that the success was not due to luck, but to the extraordinary expertise of the widow. The engineers, who had once been skeptical and exhausted, now felt a deep sense of admiration and respect. The first few moments were filled with disbelief. Some engineers hesitated to approach the helicopter, as if fearing that the engine might fail again. But as they observed the powerful hum of the machinery, their confidence slowly returned. The subtle vibrations, steady rotations, and perfect responses of each component told them that this time, the repair was complete and successful. The widow stood quietly nearby, observing without fanfare, her calm demeanor contrasting with the excitement and relief of the team. Her work was meticulous, precise, and efficient, and now it was evident just how remarkable her skill truly was. The engineers began to process everything they had learned. For days, they had tried every conventional method imaginable, only to be met with frustration. Manuals, schematics, tools, and years of experience had failed to bring the engine to life. Now, they realized that the key to success was not just knowledge or training. It was insight, intuition, and the ability to see beyond the obvious. The widow had approached the engine as a complete system rather than isolated parts, identifying the root problem that had caused repeated failures. This perspective had changed everything, allowing her to achieve what no one else could. The atmosphere in the hangar shifted from one of tension and worry to one of inspiration and collaboration. The engineers, once frustrated and defeated, now felt a renewed sense of purpose. They watched as the widow explained her method and reasoning, carefully describing how she had identified the hidden flaw and why her repair worked when so many others had failed. Each explanation was a lesson in engineering, problem-solving, and patience. The team listened attentively, eager to understand not just the what, but the why behind every decision she had made. The commander, who had made the bold call to bring in the widow, felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His judgment had been questioned at first, but now it was validated. The decision to trust someone with unconventional expertise had turned a near disaster into a success story. He walked among the engineers, congratulating them on their perseverance and acknowledging the invaluable contribution of the widow. The message was clear. Sometimes, leadership means recognizing when to trust the right person for the right task, even if it defies standard procedures or expectations. The engineers began to reflect on their own limitations and what they had learned from the experience. They realized that expertise is not just about technical skill or following rules. It is also about creativity, observation, and the ability to adapt. The widow had taught them that problems that seem impossible often have solutions that require thinking differently, combining knowledge with intuition, and carefully observing patterns that others might overlook. This lesson would stay with them, shaping how they approach challenges in the future. There was also a sense of camaraderie and shared achievement. The team had faced a near-impossible task together, and even though they could not solve it alone, their collective effort had been crucial. They had prepared the workspace, documented the engine's history, and provided support at every step. Their role, combined with the widow's expertise, had resulted in success. This collaboration highlighted the importance of teamwork, trust, and the recognition that extraordinary problems sometimes require extraordinary people. As the day continued, the engineers ran multiple tests to ensure the engine could handle the demands of flight. Every system responded perfectly, and the helicopter was cleared for operation. The sense of relief was immense. The AH-64 Apache, once silent and immobile, was now ready to return to service, stronger and more reliable than before. The success was not just technical. It was symbolic, a demonstration of what skill, patience, and collaboration could achieve even in the most challenging circumstances. The story at this point emphasizes the human aspect of problem solving. It shows how respect and admiration grow naturally when extraordinary skill meets perseverance. The widow's quiet confidence, precision, and insight transformed not only the situation with the helicopter but also the mindset of the engineers and the team as a whole. They learned that solving impossible problems often requires humility, openness to new perspectives, and the willingness to follow someone with proven expertise, even if that approach is unfamiliar. By the end of this part, the Apache is fully operational, the engineers are inspired, and the widow's reputation is cemented as a legendary figure within the aviation community. The narrative demonstrates how challenges that seem insurmountable can be overcome with the right combination of experience, intuition, and collaboration. The reader is left with a sense of triumph, satisfaction, and admiration for the skill, patience, and insight that made the success possible, setting the stage for the story's final reflections on legacy and inspiration. With the AH-64 Apache engine fully repaired and running perfectly, the hangar was filled with a mixture of relief, awe, and quiet celebration. The engineers, who had been exhausted and frustrated for days, now felt a profound sense of accomplishment. But more importantly, they felt respect for the one who had solved the impossible problem. The widow had done what no one else could, turning a grounded, silent machine into a fully operational attack helicopter. Her work had not only saved time and resources but had also restored confidence and morale among the entire team. As the engineers observed the now functioning helicopter, they began to reflect on the lessons they had learned. The process had been more than just a technical repair. It had been a masterclass in problem-solving, patience, and the importance of perspective. The widow's approach had shown them that expertise alone was not enough. Knowledge had to be combined with intuition, careful observation, and the courage to take unconventional steps. She had approached the engine as a complete system rather than focusing only on individual parts, identifying patterns and subtle flaws that everyone else had overlooked. This way of thinking had unlocked a solution that seemed impossible to the team just days earlier. The commander, who had called in the widow, watched quietly as the engineers absorbed these lessons. His bold decision had been vindicated, demonstrating the importance of trust and leadership. Sometimes, solving a problem is not about doing it all yourself. It's about recognizing who is best equipped to tackle a challenge and giving them the freedom to apply their skills. The success of the repair reinforced this truth, showing that leadership often means knowing when to step back and allow others to shine. Word of the repair quickly spread through the base. Pilots, officers, and other personnel heard about the widow's extraordinary contribution, and soon her reputation grew. She became known as someone who could solve the most complex and seemingly impossible mechanical problems, someone whose expertise went beyond manuals and schematics. For the engineers who had struggled for days, witnessing her skill firsthand was a humbling and inspiring experience. They realized that their own knowledge, while extensive, had limits, and that the widow had shown them how experience and intuition could bridge that gap. The story also highlighted the importance of teamwork. While the widow was the key to solving the problem, the engineer's role was still crucial. They had provided the necessary support, tools, and information about the engine's history, enabling her to work effectively. The collaboration between the team and the widow illustrated that even the most skilled individual needs a strong support system to succeed. This combination of expertise, preparation, and cooperation had turned what seemed like an insurmountable challenge into a success story. As the Apache continued to run smoothly, the engineers and the command staff conducted thorough tests to ensure that the helicopter could handle the demands of real missions. Every system responded perfectly, confirming that the repair was complete and reliable. The helicopter was cleared to return to full operational duty, a testament to the widow's skill and precision. It was not just a technical victory. It was a symbol of ingenuity, perseverance, and the power of human problem-solving. Beyond the technical achievement, the experience left a lasting impact on everyone involved. The engineers gained a new perspective on problem-solving, learning to combine technical knowledge with careful observation, intuition, and creativity. They realized that failure is not necessarily a dead end but an opportunity to see things differently, to question assumptions, and to seek new approaches. The widow's work became a source of inspiration, showing that even the most difficult challenges could be overcome with the right mindset, expertise, and determination. Over time, the story of the Widow and the AH-64 Apache engine became legendary within the aviation community. Engineers and pilots shared the tale of the grounded helicopter, the repeated failures, and the remarkable individual who had solved the problem when everyone else had given up. The narrative served as a reminder that extraordinary problems require extraordinary solutions, and that experience, patience, and insight are just as important as technical skill. The legacy of the Widow extended beyond a single repair. It became a lesson in ingenuity, resilience, and the value of recognizing and utilizing talent effectively. For the engineers, the commander, and the entire team, the experience strengthened their confidence and inspired them to approach future challenges with a new mindset. They had learned that even when a problem seems impossible, there is always a way forward if one is willing to observe carefully, think creatively, and trust the right expertise. The success of the repair also reinforced the importance of humility, showing that even the most skilled professionals can learn from someone with a fresh perspective and exceptional insight. In the end, the AH-64 Apache soared through the skies once again, fully operational and stronger than ever. The Widow's contribution had ensured that this critical machine was ready for any mission, and her story became an enduring example of problem-solving at its finest. The engineers and the commander never forgot the lessons they had learned. That courage, skill, collaboration, and insight could achieve the impossible, and that sometimes the right person at the right moment can change everything. The legacy of the Widow lived on, inspiring generations of engineers, pilots, and problem solvers to tackle challenges with determination, intelligence, and creativity.